So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know that we, just before the break, heard audio recording of a telephone call between the defendant and Ray Caron. Similar to some other exhibits you've seen, some of that exhibit has been redacted. The redactions were for legal reasons. You're not to speculate as to why or what was redacted from that exhibit. Thank you. Sir, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to provide this court shall be the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury? Thank you. Please be seated. Once you're settled and you're close enough to that microphone, if you could state your full name for our court reporter and spell your last name.
Jamie Timbas, Timbas.
Thank you. And Mr. Timbas, because we're wearing masks, it's somewhat harder to hear, so I'm going to ask you to keep your voice to a higher level than you'd normally do. Thank you.
Mr. Timbas, do you know the defendant, William Argie?
Yes, I do.
Back in February of 2019, less than 2 months before his wife's death, what did the defendant ask you to do with respect to his wife?
I met him at a restaurant in Manchester, New Hampshire, at approximately 6 o'clock, and he told me that he had a $400,000 insurance policy on his wife, and he offered to give me half the money if I killed him.
The defendant right here, Mr. Argie, asked you to help him kill his wife?
Yes, he did.
We'll discuss Mr. Argie's solicitation of murder soon. Let's begin with some information about you, okay? What is your role in connection with the business in Manchester known in 2019 as the Poker Room?
It's a family-owned business.
And what's your role with respect to it? You're an owner or part owner?
I'm a part owner, yes.
And for about how long have you had that role? About?
I've been in the travel gaming business about 27 years.
Has the name changed since 2019?
Yes, it has.
In 2019, it was known as the Poker Room?
The Manchester Poker Room, yes.
So I'll refer to it as the Poker Room, okay? About how many people worked at the Poker Room at any given time in 2019?
On a daily basis or overall?
On a daily basis.
25 to 30.
And where is the Poker Room located in Manchester?
South Willow Street in Manchester.
And what type of gambling activities are run at the Poker Room?
We have the DraftKings Sportsbook there. We have table games like blackjack, roulette, things like that. We run cash poker and we run tournament poker.
For the record, if you can identify in court the person you know as William Argie, the person who who asked you to help him kill his wife.
Sitting there in the black suit at the defense table.
May the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
It will.
How did you...
Reapproach. Sure. How did you come to meet and know Mr. Argie, the defendant?
On our property, there is like an urgent care facility. He was working there, and it's adjacent to the building that we're in, and that's how I met.
And did he gamble at your establishment?
Yes, he did.
From interaction with the defendant at your establishment, did the two of you eventually become friends?
Yes, we did.
In 2019, for about how long did you know the defendant for? About?
Approximately 8 years.
And in 2019, what was your relationship to the defendant?
He was a customer. He was a friend. I consider him a friend.
In addition to the time that the defendant spent at your business on Willow Street in Manchester, did you spend time with him elsewhere in the time when you knew him?
Yes, I did. We traveled to Foxwood on numerous occasions together, a group of us together.
Did you and the defendant and a group of friends also regularly go out to eat together?
Yes, we did.
And this was part of friendly activity among friends?
Yes, it was.
Did you also have the defendant's cell phone number, or he have your cell phone number during this period?
Yes, we did.
In the time that you knew the defendant, would the two of you communicate by cell phone, whether it be talking or texting?
Yes, we would.
After you learned of Maureen Argie's death, did you allow investigators to take photos of text messages that you exchanged between the defendant that you had on your cell phone?
Yes, I did.
Did you ask for a search warrant, or did you allow investigators to do so just with your permission?
Just with my permission.
And actually, if you can explain to the jurors how you came to be in contact with investigators. Did they contact you first, or did you go to the police?
No, I got a call the morning of Maureen's death from a friend of mine, and I immediately called the Londonderry Police Department to volunteer some information that I might have in regards to what transpired. So I made the initial call to the Londonderry Police.
And after you reached out to investigators, did you agree to meet with them and talk about your friend, the defendant?
Yes, I did.
As of 2019, about how long had the defendant been gambling at your casino in Manchester? About.
Probably 6 or 7 years.
And how frequently would you see the defendant in your business?
Maybe 3 to 4 times a week.
And typically, how long would he spend at any given time when he'd be there?
Sometimes he would come in for 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes he would stay from open to close, actually.
And typically, what kind of gambling activities would the defendant participate in your business?
He would play No Limit Texas Hold'em.
Mr. Timbas, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up a little bit more,
Sorry.
okay? Thank you.
You also said that in addition to being a customer, he was your friend.
Yes, he was.
And that among the activities that you did with your friend is that you went to casino trips to Foxwoods.
Yes.
When the defendant was at these trips, what type of gambling activities would he participate in at Foxwoods?
He would play poker, he would play craps, he would play roulette, he would play a lot of table games also.
From what you personally observed of the defendant's gambling activities, did he typically win money, lose money, break even? Typically.
He would typically lose.
From what you observed, Mr. Timbas, as of 2019, about how much money do you estimate that the defendant lost at your business over the years? Estimate.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Did the defendant ever discuss with you specific debt issues that he had?
Yes, he did. I remember an instance, we were out to dinner, and it was his turn to pay. And the bill came, and he said to me, "I hope the bill is not over $300. And I said, "Doc, why?" He said, "Because that's all I have left on my credit card." And I said to him, I said, "You know, what was your limit on the credit card?" And he told me $50,000. So, yes, he and I discussed often his financial situation.
With respect to this particular conversation that you shared with us, the $50,000 outstanding credit card debt, when was that conversation, or about when was that conversation in relation to his wife's untimely death?
Probably January of 2019, somewhere thereabouts.
And in relaying that account for us, you said Doc. And is that how you typically knew the defendant by?
Yes.
And you said that you were at dinner and it was his turn to pay. Was this one of this group dinner with
Yes.
you and the defendant and other friends that you talked about before?
We would go out periodically, and we would take turns paying for dinner, yes.
In addition to knowing the defendant and calling the defendant by his nickname Doc, did you and other people at the poker room also have another nickname for the defendant?
Well, On my phone, he was referred to as Crazy Doc.
Well, with respect to withdrawals that he'd make at your casino.
We used to joke because we used to call him the ATM King, because I think historically, and at our establishment, you could only take out $200 at a time, and every time you did, you'd have to pay a fee, and we used to have a running joke that he was the king of the ATM fees.
King of the ATM fees.
Yes,
In addition to seeing the defendant make ATM withdrawals at your establishment, did you also see him borrow money from other gamblers?
absolutely, yes.
To your knowledge, did the defendant owe money to other gamblers at the time of his wife's death?
Yes, he did.
In the weeks leading up to the death of the defendant's wife, was he continuing to gamble at your business and lose money at your business?
Well, I think a couple weeks before Maureen's death, he was at my place, and he was playing at a table, and he moved to our table, and he had a lot of money in front of him, and he ended up losing the money, and he asked me to loan him $1,000, which I did not do. He had dinner, he had drinks, he had a massage from the massage girl, and he said he would be right back, and that was the last time I saw him.
In this interaction that I'll ask you a few more questions about when was this last interaction you had with the defendant in relation to his wife's death? About?
Probably 3 weeks before, somewhere thereabouts.
And this was also after his solicitation of her murder for you?
Yes,
You said that the defendant brought to your table, were you playing poker at another table, and he joined you and other poker players?
yes,
You said that the defendant brought to your table a large amount of money that he quickly lost, or that he ultimately lost?
yes.
How much money are we talking about that the defendant lost when you last saw him?
Probably $1,500.
$1,500?
Yes,
And you also said when the defendant left, he had not paid certain bills for your establishment?
he did not pay for his meal, his drinks, or he had the massage girl come over for a time, and he did not pay her also.
In addition for not paying for these various services and goods at your establishment, in addition to losing about $1,500 by your estimation, did you also see at this time the defendant borrowing money from other gamblers?
Yes, I did. I know of 2 people that day that he borrowed money from.
And you said that he also asked to borrow money from you,
Correct,
and you told him no.
yes.
And that was the last time you saw him?
That was the last time I saw him.
Do you recall him leaving anything behind your establishment that last time when you saw him?
He left his credit card.
And that credit card, debit card, did you give that to investigators?
I did.
After you last saw the defendant in March, and before you heard about his wife's death, did you attempt to contact him by cell phone?
By text, yes.
So I want to show you entries on State's Exhibit 43. This is a chart that the jurors have seen before. It's a cell phone communications chart, and this is for the cell phone of the defendant. And it shows on March 29th, 5 separate text messages sent to his cell phone from a number 603-854-0209. And March of 2019, was that your cell phone number?
Yes, it was.
And what in substance were you texting the defendant about when you sent him these various text messages?
I was unhappy with him that I had found out that he was playing at other rooms, specifically Chasers and other rooms, and that he had borrowed money from customers of mine that were asking about him, and I was upset that he was playing in other places, and he had walked out on his obligations at my place. I was annoyed about it.
And you made that very clear in your text messages, right?
I did, yes, I did.
And again, those text messages, you shared those with investigators and allowed them to photograph them, right?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to contact the defendant by cell phone, or did he respond to any of the text messages that you sent him on March 29th?
He did not.
Was that unusual?
Yes, it was.
And how was that unusual?
Because we would, in the morning, sometimes when we were setting up the first table of the day, I would communicate with some of the customers. that wanted to be on that first table, and, you know, we would communicate regularly that, you know, I'm setting up the game at noontime, do you want a seat? So, I mean, he always usually responded to me quickly to my text. This was unusual for him.
Now, you shared with the jurors that you knew the defendant, your friend, as Dot, that you and other people at the business referred to him sometimes as the king of the ATM. Was there also a time in early 2019 where the defendant wanted you to call him or text him by the name of Tex?
Yes.
If you can explain that for the jurors.
Well, we have a thing called Poker Atlas, where you can either call in, it's a service that we provide to our customers to reserve a table, seat at the table. If you want to sign up for a tournament later on in the day, you can sign up for the tournament. And I came in one day, and he was standing at the counter, and I said, I didn't see your name on Poker Atlas, and you didn't refer to me. And he pointed to we have a board, and he said, that's me. And I said, who? He said, I'm Tex.
Hold on a minute. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, you can resume.
And I said, who's Tex? He said, well, my wife has found out how to chime into Poker Atlas, and that's the name I want to go under from now on, so she doesn't know that I'm here.
In recounting that story for us, you told us that the defendant talked about his wife had gotten into his Poker Atlas application. So you knew that he was married?
I did.
Did you ever meet the defendant's wife?
I never did, but on occasion she would call and ask if he was there.
I'm sorry, we can't go into any conversations that you had, but you never physically met his wife?
I never did. Sorry.
Did the defendant often talk about his wife and his marriage to you and to others while you were present?
Constantly.
Generally, when the defendant spoke about his wife and his marriage, was it positively or negatively?
It was negative.
And we'll get into what you recall the defendant saying about his wife and his marriage shortly. But first, I want to return to what we began your testimony with, Mr. Timbas, and that is the defendant asking you to help him kill his wife. About when did that solicitation occur in relation to his wife's untimely death?
Well, it was the day before Valentine's Day, so it was February 13th.
And where did that conversation occur?
At an Italian restaurant in Manchester called Piccola's on Elm Street in Manchester.
So this was a face-to-face encounter between you and your friend, the defendant?
Yes, it was.
And how was that decided as the meeting place?
That's where we went there often, and he had texted me, and I parked in the back, and he had parked in the front, and I walked in the back door. He was sitting at the bar, and we sat there for a little bit. We had a drink, we had something to eat, and that conversation transpired.
Now, you had told us before that as part of your assistance in the case, you allowed investigators to photograph certain text messages that you had on your phone, right? So I want to show you State's Exhibit 48. And these are text messages that were recovered from your phone. And you've seen these text messages before, haven't you? And these text messages, they're dated Wednesday, February 13th. We have one, it begins, meeting you there, yes, I'm here, and then where? And these series of 4 text messages, did they relate to that solicitation of murder that the defendant asked you about?
Yes.
Were those the text messages that got you and him at the restaurant together?
Yes.
And that's documentation, right?
Yes.
When you saw the defendant at the restaurant, was he there alone or was he with anyone?
He had parked in the front. As I said, I parked in the back, and he was alone. He was sitting in the car.
And how about yourself?
I was alone.
At some point in time, you had met the defendant, you two sit down. Does he explain to you why he wanted to meet you?
Beforehand or when we sat down?
When you sat down?
Conversation quickly went into why he wanted to meet with me, yes.
And if you can explain to the jurors or relate to the jurors what that conversation entailed.
He's told me, as I said, that he had a $400,000 insurance policy on his wife, and I asked him if she knew about the policy. He said no, and he said, I'll give you half of the money if you help me kill my wife. And I said, Doc, please don't talk crazy to me. He said, no, I'm serious. And I said, please, I'm not interested. I don't want to have this conversation. And then he said, if you can find me a hitman to do it, I will give you a piece of the insurance money. And can I repeat what I said to him?
So we're all adults, and I've said the word fuck in front of the jurors before, so let's talk about what was said during this conversation.
I said, are you out of your fucking mind? I said, I don't want to have this conversation. I want nothing to do with this. I said, I really don't want anything to do with this. But that was my response to him.
At this meeting, and this was a meeting that the defendant arranged, right?
Yes.
Did he say why he wanted his wife dead?
Yes, that he hated her, that he was in financial problems, and that he hated her. He just wanted her dead. He kept talking about, I need the money, I have the money, more financial than anything.
How did the defendant respond when you told him that you wouldn't help him and you wouldn't help him find a hitman?
Conversation ended for a moment, and we had a drink, had a little bit to eat, and he asked me again. He started to ask me again, and I said, Doc, I don't want to talk to you. I'm not having this conversation with you. You need to stop this. And that was the end. He did not bring that up.
Later during this same meeting and conversation, did the defendant try to walk back his attempts to solicit murder with you?
Yes, he was basically saying that, I was just kidding, I'm not serious. And I said, I remember saying to him, I said, your wife doesn't know that you have an insurance policy? Finally, he said, no, she does not. But he tried to make light of it. He had been drinking. I think he'd been drinking before he got there.
Now, in that meeting that the defendant arranged with you in February, were the reasons that he gave for asking you to help kill his wife or find someone to kill his wife, was what he said consistent with statements that he had made in the past and afterwards about his dissatisfaction with his wife and his marriage to her?
Yes.
So let's turn to other comments that you recall the defendant making about his marriage and his wife. Let's start with the marriage. What do you recall some of the remarks the defendant making about his marriage?
Well, he felt that his wife was not proportionally earning the same amount of money he was, and he was upset about that. I remember there was an instance where he was professing that he was going to go, I think, to North Carolina to go to law school. There was something. Before that, he had apparently been offered a job somewhere down in the Carolinas that she did not want to go. And he used to talk to me about going, and I said, how are you going to leave your children behind? But he was upset with her because she did not want to go to wherever it was where there was a job opportunity. And he felt that she did not condone his gambling, and it was an ongoing issue between the two.
What the defendant would talk to you directly and what you would overhear him saying about his marriage, was that a once-in-a-time conversation or something that he'd say seldom or something that he'd say regularly?
Very regularly.
And again, for about how long had you known the defendant for?
7 or 8 years.
So we've gone over some of what you remember the defendant saying about marriage. What about his wife herself? What did you hear the defendant say about his wife? And again, we're all adults. You need to testify about what you remember the defendant saying about his wife.
That he hated her, that he found her disgusting, that she was fat, that unattractive. just horrible things. I mean, he said terrible things about his wife on a regular basis. Terrible things.
With respect to the defendant talking about his wife being fat, being ugly, unattractive, did that conversation or conversations continue up to the last time when you saw the defendant?
Yes.
You skipped out of your business?
Yes.
And again, these conversations, what the defendant would say about his wife, was this a once-in-time thing, seldom thing? Was this a regular thing that the defendant would talk about when he was around you and when you heard him talk to others?
It was common. Very common. And it got worse. It got worse the last 6 or 8 months. It got worse. It was vile. It was more vile, I thought.
Which is the next topic I wanted to talk to you about. We've talked about the actual solicitation of murder in February at the restaurant. Outside of that, did the defendant talk violently about his wife?
I remember sitting next to him one day at the poker table, and he turned to me and he said, you know, if you stick a hypodermic needle in someone with nothing in it while they're sleeping, that they would die and no one would ever know how they died. And I said, Doc, what are you talking about? He said, I'm just telling you, the air bubble will go into them and they would die, and it would look like a heart attack or an embolism or something. And, you know, I don't remember him saying the perfect crime, but he said, and I said, Doc, what are you talking about? He said, nothing, no, nothing. Well, why are you talking crazy? I remember having that conversation with him.
In addition to that conversation, would you hear the defendant talk and threaten to kill his wife, other than that act of solicitation at the restaurant?
Yes, he often said that he would be better off without her. Yes, he did.
And Mr. Timbas, I want to circle once again back to that meeting with the defendant at the restaurant in Manchester 2 months before his wife's death. Do you recall the defendant, bless you, talking about how he wanted his wife to be murdered? Bless you.
He wanted to make it look like an accident.
And how so?
He wanted to make it look like she killed herself.
And do you recall anything else about that?
I do not.
You remember talking to investigators?
Yes.
And would reviewing a transcript of that interview or one of those interviews refresh your record?
Yes.
Page 11. Page 11, phone call transcript. Sorry about that, Mr. Timbas. So you remember the very first time that you contacted the police station, you actually telephoned the police?
Yes.
And you're aware that telephone calls with the police at the station are typically recorded. And so I want to show you a transcript of your telephone call to the police. And I want to focus your attention on page 11, but feel free to read anything before that and after that to yourself. When you're done, just look up so I know, so I can follow up with questions. Reviewing that, refresh your recollection as to what else the defendant said?
Yes.
How he wanted his wife's murder to look?
He wanted to make it look like a suicide.
And did he also talk about how she was sometimes depressed?
He said that she suffered from depression, and we wanted to make it look like a suicide.
And
Yes.
that's how the defendant explained he wanted people to believe his murder was a suicide because she suffered from depression?
Yes.
No further questions.
Any cross-examination?
Yes. About when was the time that Bill asked you to change his name to Tex for the Poker Atlas in 2019?
Probably around January, somewhere thereabouts.
Okay. In January. So at that time, he told you, I'm trying to avoid having my wife detect me.
Correct.
So you knew there was issues between Bill gambling and his wife not liking it.
Yes.
And that was in January. Yeah?
As I recall, it was January, yes.
And you would get calls from her looking for Bill at your establishment.
It happened twice.
And you lied to her about whether or not he was there.
I did lie twice to her, yes, I did.
And in March, you're saying that so you knew he was avoiding her in January. You lied for Bill to avoid this woman. Bill had been running his mouth about how he felt about his wife, venting and exaggerating, right?
Well, I would have checked, the witness didn't.
I'll rephrase the question. Okay, so you knew about the problems in the marriage, about the fact he was gambling, correct? In the
Yes.
spring of 2019?
Yes.
And it was before the spring of 2019, that there was tension between Bill and his wife. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And,
Hold on just a second, Counsel. Mr. Timbas, I do need to ask you to keep your voice up, okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
you never tried to meet this woman that Bill said he couldn't stand, right?
Well, may I answer the question? I sat with Bill numerous times and said to him that your kids are still young, that you don't want them to see the person that you are. And I multiple times had a conversation with him saying, it's not too late to change. You need to change your ways before your kids get old enough and they really see you for who you are. And you know you're not proud of who you are. He and I had multiple conversations about that. Multiple times about his children and his family.
Okay, I appreciate the answer about his children's, but you never tried to meet his wife. Is that accurate?
I did not.
And it's fair to say when people come to your establishment, they sometimes come to get away from the real world.
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer.
Well, let's talk about your business. You own casinos,
I do.
and your family business is you and your wife.
Me and my wife, and we have another partner, yes. There's three of us.
Okay, and you have a business in Manchester,
We have multiple casinos.
business in Keene,
Yes?
business in Lebanon,
Yes?
Northampton.
No?
You were thinking about getting one in Northampton.
I don't understand the question.
Okay. So you're in the business to make money.
Well, one of the things we do, yes, but one of the things we do is we have, over the 27 years that we've been in business, It's called charitable gaming because 35% of the gross revenue that we generate goes to a charity, the charity that night. And in the last 27 years, I think a fair estimate of the amount of money that we raise for charity is probably in excess of $100 million. So, yes, it is for profit, but there's a lot of good that comes out of what we do also.
So, so the balance of the 65% is the amount of money you make.
No, 10% of the gross operating revenue goes to the state. And out of the 55% that we keep, we pay payroll, we pay rent, we pay utilities, we pay all other costs associated with running the business.
And, by the way, the charitable giving is required by law.
Yes, it is.
You wouldn't be able to run the business if you didn't give it to charity.
We are licensed under the New Hampshire State Lottery, and that is the requirement of operating these facilities, yes.
Are people able to hear the witness? Okay. Thank you. I just want to explain, I think we've gone through it with a couple of witnesses, but the ways that you make money, earn money, you do it by the poker tables, you collect like commissions, like rakes,
Collect a rake on every hand, yes.
and that's a commission on what the percentage of money that people put into the game.
No, it's a standard $5 rake per pot.
And so the more games that people play at the poker game, the more money your establishment makes.
The more hands that are dealt, the more money we make, yes.
And then there's games that involve a dealer, such as a roulette game.
Correct.
And in that sense, if nobody wins, the establishment takes all the money.
The players play against the house. We bankroll games like roulette, blackjack, things like that. And if the house wins, we win. If the house loses, we lose.
Because it's one more way that you make money is you win when all the customers lose, right?
Hopefully, at times, yes.
And then do you have slot machines there?
We have-
Judge, I would object to this point because where's the relevance now? I haven't objected to this point, but I don't recall there being any testimony that Mr. Argie was playing slots.
I'm just establishing the type of business he runs. You've been going into poker
Sure,
games.
I'll allow a little bit more, but I agree that it'll become irrelevant soon.
And you have slot machines?
They are not slot machines.
And what are they?
They're called Lucky 7 machines. And they're based on bingo, because we have a bingo operation there also, and they're bingo-based electronic pull-tab dispensers. They are not slot machines.
But it's money that you put in the machine,
Yes.
and sometimes you get money back, but most times you don't.
I can't agree with that.
Well, how much money does your establishment make over a month on these machines?
Objection, relevance.
I'll try to weave it in later.
Okay, sure, thank you.
A couple more things that you earn money off, drinks and food.
Yes.
And the establishment is designed to encourage players to stay.
Yes.
The more games are played, the more money is changing hands.
Yes.
So you've known Bill for a number of years.
Yes.
You know him to be a poor gambler,
At times, yes.
and he kept playing.
He did?
He was a gambling addict.
Yes.
And you would keep encouraging him to play.
No.
Well, you know those texts that you allowed the police to photograph?
Yes.
There's one on February 1, a text.
Well, I would object because it appears she's going to be reading from something that's not in evidence.
I'm just
Right.
asking if something happened.
Yeah, I'm gonna allow it.
But if you want to know which one it is JPEG 123 from CD 31. On February 1st, did you text, or this sounds something like you would do, text Bill saying, playing at noon?
Yes,
And he would say, yes.
yes,
Good, see you at noon. Come hungry.
yes,
So you would invite him to play. This is in February 1st of this 2019. So I'm going to show if the text says change from doc to text so wife don't see, and you reply okay, does that sound familiar?
yes,
And that, if I said that that occurred in February, does that sound about right?
yes,
And a text on February 6th saying playing at noon text. And sometimes he would say no.
yes,
Sometimes he would say, I'm dealing with some stuff at the house.
possibly, yes,
Sometimes he would say, I have to work.
possibly, yes,
And
That's actually objection, hearsay.
I will rephrase.
Okay, the objection sustained.
And you would continue to ask him whether or not he was coming to play at noon.
What's your definition of continue?
Pardon me?
What's your definition of continue?
Well, I could, February 16, playing at noon.
As I said in my earlier testimony, the first table that was set up of the day was a pretty coveted table. So I would reach out to the regulars on a regular basis to ask them if they wanted a seat for when we opened. Yes, I would do that on occasion.
So on February 16, you reached out through regular Bill Argie, playing at noon.
Yes,
February 16, just days after, you say that Bill tried to solicit you to commit murder.
yes,
So instead of saying, I'm not dealing anything with this guy, you invited him to continue to play at your establishment.
I mean, he said it so often, I never took him seriously, to be very honest with you. That's why I never said anything. He said that so often that I never took him seriously. That's the answer.
So going to an establishment off your premises, and he said, or it didn't happen,
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
or the conversation never happened.
The conversation did happen.
You didn't mark it in the calendar, did you?
No,
You didn't tell anybody at the bar, did you?
I went home and told my wife that night. And I went back into the poker room the next day and I told people what happened, yes, I did. But as I
You
said,
didn't call the police that somebody attempted to solicit you to commit murder, did you?
he said it often to me, I didn't take it seriously. I did not take it seriously.
You never tried to meet Maureen
No, I didn't.
because you didn't take him seriously, right?
I don't understand the question.
Because you didn't take him seriously,
I did not take what seriously?
whatever he was venting about. You thought he was just venting.
No, I was well aware that his home life was in shambles and that his marriage was disintegrating and that he couldn't stand his wife. But did I take the fact that he asked me or mentioned on multiple occasions that he was going to kill his wife? No, I didn't take that part seriously. But the rest of it, I did take seriously. Yes,
So
I
you
did.
took seriously that his wife was concerned about his gambling addiction.
Did I take that seriously?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
But you continued to invite him to your establishment.
Yes, I did.
By the way, you sat on the first table, right?
On occasion, I did, yes.
And you're a good poker player.
That remains to be seen.
That's why you're in the business. You like playing.
I'm in the business because it supports my wife and my children and my grandchildren, and it's a good way to make a living, and we do a lot of good things for charities, as I said earlier. It's part of it. The main part is it's a very good business for my family.
You like to play poker.
I enjoy playing poker.
And you invited Bill to play with you repeatedly.
I invited multiple people to play with me repeatedly.
And you invited Bill.
Yes, I did.
Part of the success of your business is due to your reputation, right?
I don't understand the question.
Well, you talk about the amount of money that goes to charity, correct?
I don't understand the correlation.
You like to talk about the amount of money you give to charity because it makes your business look good.
No, I like to talk about the amount of money we raise for charity because we're doing a really good thing for charities that really need the money. That's the beautiful part of the business that we run. That's the rewarding part of the business that we run.
And it helps your business to know how much money you give in charity.
Helps my business how?
Well, people like to come in, your customers like to come in and think they're helping charity when you say that proceeds go to charity.
I think that a majority of my customers like that aspect of what's happening. Yes, I do.
And you were saying that, by the way, in addition to gambling a lot, Bill, you say Bill drank a lot?
Yes, he did.
And you had to kick him out of the business once or twice because of that?
Shut him off on a regular basis. I've asked him to leave for numerous reasons on occasion. That was one of them.
Okay. And because one of the things you want to do is keep your place peaceful.
Yes.
And sometimes Bill got loud.
Well, when you mix alcohol with gambling and socialization and all of that, sometimes things don't go the way you want them to go.
And another thing that you like to make sure of is that your customers that loan each other money, that they get paid back.
I don't understand the question.
Well, it's better for your establishment that your customers pay back loans that they take from each other.
I encourage all my customers not to loan anyone any money, and I have never loaned anyone any money in any of my casinos. It's a terrible practice.
And when you found out that Bill was gambling someplace else, when your customers were out of money, you got angry.
I wasn't angry. I was annoyed. I was disappointed. And then I was a little angry, but it was more so for the restaurant, the waitresses, the massage girl. But it was a regular occurrence that he was borrowing money from people. It happened all the time.
By the way, one occasion after Bill supposedly solicited you to murder, you invited him to go to Boxwood.
Yes. As I said earlier, he said it so often that I never really took it seriously, unfortunately.
So the state was pointing out to a series of texts that you sent to him on I believe it's March 29th. Remember when the state was showing you the
Yes.
list of texts? Somewhere around there, right?
Yes.
And it was the last time you tried to communicate with.
It wasn't the last time I tried to communicate with him. The day that I found out,
Before Maureen died, the
Yes.
last time?
yes,
Okay. And after, when you found out that he was gambling someplace else, did you send a text that said, you know, you're a piece of shit?
yes,
You owe everybody money in here, including my establishment, and you were at Chase, is playing high stakes. You're a fucking dog.
I did send that text.
You were just disappointed.
Yeah, I was disappointed. I was annoyed.
You were annoyed.
Yeah, I was.
And I will catch up with you. You are a shameful gambler. I have eyes in all the poker robs, and the next time that I hear you're in a poker room, I'm going to show up and it's going to be fucking ugly.
Yes,
That sound like something you would say?
I did say that. I sent him that text.
Because you were angry.
I was annoyed.
And that's the last thing on the text, and a few days later, you heard about the suspicious death in Londonderry.
Yes,
And the last message on your text was that ugly text.
that was not my last text to him.
And the next text you say,
What did you do? You need to reach out to me. That's what I said.
right,
That was my last text to him, yes.
you immediately sent out when you heard the message, right?
Yes,
The news about the suspicious death.
yes,
And you didn't wait for officers to come, you went to the officers.
yes, I did.
And you told them about a so-called solicitation.
It was not a so-called solicitation. It was a solicitation. I felt terrible. I felt guilty. I felt that I should have done something. I felt this time I should have taken him seriously. Yes, I felt terrible, and I still feel terrible. I feel responsible.
And you were able to explain your angry text, right? Your text to Bill on March 29th.
Was I able to explain it?
Yeah.
I admit that I sent it because I was annoyed that he had gone somewhere else and not fulfilled his obligations at my place. I was annoyed about that, yes, I was. And I did send that text.
That may have a moment, you know.
Sure.
I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, thank you. Would this witness be released?
Yes.
Sir, you can step down, you can stay or leave as you choose. Thank you.
State next calls David Lang.
So would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to provide this court and jury shall be the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. After you're comfortable and near that microphone, if you could state your full name for our court reporter and spell your last name.
David Lang, Lang.
And Mr. Lang, I want to remind you, we're all wearing masks. It's a lot harder to hear other people talking. So I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up at all times when you're answering questions. Thank you.
Mr. Lang, back in 2019, where did you live?
122 West Road in Londonderry?
And from your time living at 122 West Road, did you come to know the people who lived at 118 West Road, William and Maureen Argie and their 2 children?
Yes, we did.
And do you see William Argie here in the courtroom today?
I do.
And if you can, please identify him for us.
Gentleman sitting over on the block.
The record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, Mr. Argie.
It will.
Mr. Lang, soon after you learned of Maureen Argie's death, did you speak to the police by telephone?
Yes, I did.
Did you also later talk to investigators in a recorded interview?
I did.
I want to get back to your familiarity with the defendant in 2019. Did you come to know the defendant from being neighbors with him on West Road, or had you had some other connection with him?
No, we met them because we were neighbors. Yep.
Did you ever accompany the defendant when he was gambling or spent time with any of his gambling associates?
I did not.
Did you participate in an intervention held by the defendant's friends and family members in the spring of 2018?
No, I did not.
Even though you didn't participate in that intervention, were you made aware that such an intervention occurred?
I was.
And how were you made aware of that intervention? Who told you about it?
Bill had told me about it a few days after it happened.
And what do you recall the defendant telling you about that intervention?
It happened to his surprise, and it upset him a little bit about it.
Did the defendant express any feelings towards Maureen regarding that intervention?
He was angry.
Angry at Maureen?
Yes.
You recall him using the word setting him up?
Yes, I do.
So I have a calendar up on the screen. This is an exhibit that the jurors have seen multiple times before. For the record, it states Exhibit 91. I want to direct your attention to the week before Maureen Argie's death. And specifically, I want to turn your attention to Wednesday, March 27th of 2019. Did you see the defendant that day?
Yes, I did.
And where did you see the defendant?
He had come to my house.
Was that an expected or a planned encounter that you had with the defendant that Wednesday before his wife's death?
No, it wasn't planned.
What was the defendant doing at your house that Wednesday?
He had come over to use my printer.
And did he explain why he wanted to borrow your printer?
Yep, he was in the process of selling the house, if I recall, and needed to print out some papers in regards to that.
While the defendant was at your house that Wednesday before his wife's death, did he talk to you about various matters that were going on in his life at the time?
He was telling me about his divorce, or the pending divorce.
Was this just a few-minute conversation that the defendant had with you, or was it longer?
It was longer.
Was among the topics discussed by the defendant with you that Wednesday financial problems that he was having?
I believe it was, yes.
And what do you recall the defendant telling you about financial problems?
They were behind on some payments for his car, one of the cars, I believe, and they were behind on a few mortgage payments as well.
Do you remember the defendant talking about bankruptcy?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recall the defendant talking to you about with respect to bankruptcy?
I cannot recall that at the moment.
But you do recall talking to investigators, right?
Yes.
And you willingly spoke to investigators in this case, right?
Yes.
And would reviewing a transcript of that interview with investigators refresh recollection?
Yes, sir.
So page 5, Counselor. I may approach, right, sir?
You may.
So, Mr. Lang, I'm showing you a transcript. It says interview of David Lang on June 18th of 2019. And what I'm going to ask you to do to yourself is read page 5, but feel free to read anything before then and after that. I'd like you to focus on 5, but feel free to read whatever you wish. Read it to yourself. When you're done, please look back over to me so I know and I can follow up with some questions. Does that refresh your recollection as to what the defendant told you with respect to bankruptcy?
Yes, it does.
And please, what you remember.
He said that he didn't want to file for bankruptcy, but he might. He thought it was a low point if he was to have to done that. And I explained to him that my father-in-law had done that, and it was like a reset for him, and he's a successful businessman now, but just because you file for bankruptcy doesn't mean that it's the end.
With respect to low point, what you told the investigators was that Mr. Argie thought it was as low of a point as you could possibly get, right?
Yes.
Am I reading that transcript right?
Yes, sir.
From discussions that you had with the defendant, were you aware of employment issues that he was having in addition to the financial issues that he told you about?
Yes, I did.
Did the defendant tell you in substance that he was having a hard time finding employment?
Yes.
Also, while the defendant was at your house on March 27th, the week before his wife's death, did he talk to you about the state of his marriage to her?
He said that they were in the process of a divorce, and it was very upsetting.
Who was divorcing who, according to what the defendant told you?
She was divorcing him.
And what about with respect to the house and the divorce? What do you recall the defendant saying about that?
They're going to have to sell the house, and that's why he was over.
And do you recall in substance what the defendant said with respect to his position with the house?
Well, he didn't want to sell it.
Do you recall anything else?
No.
So you have your transcript in front of you, so I'm going to ask you now to look at page 7 and review page 7. And again, feel free to review whatever you wish before then or after then. And when you're done, look up and I'll have a follow-up question or two. Does that refresh your recollection as to anything else the defendant said with respect to the house and the divorce?
That he had been kicked out prior? Is that what you're asking, sir?
Well, my
On page
question
7?
right now, I have to limit it. Does that refresh your recollection as to anything else the defendant said with respect to the house and the marriage? If it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And what else do you recall?
That he had been kicked out for a short amount of time prior to this?
Well, actually, let me just, I'll impeach you that. No problem. Submit my statements accurately. He said, the defendant said, you know, not great about how he's doing. You know, she's kicking me out of the house. Isn't this what you relayed to investigators?
Yes, sir, it is.
And with respect to who was kicking the defendant out of the house, who was kicking him out of the house, according to him?
Maureen,
In 2019, for about how long had the defendant been living at 118 West Road?
it's about 10 years, I believe.
The defendant told you the Wednesday before his wife died about financial problems that he was having, that his wife was divorcing him and kicking him out of the house. According to what the defendant told you, did he want to sell the house?
No, he didn't want to sell it.
And who did he blame for having to leave the house?
He blamed Maureen.
What were the living arrangements to be if the family home was being sold, according to what the defendant told you that Wednesday before his wife's death?
He was planning on moving to Maine temporarily to a vacation home, I believe, that his family had. And Maureen was going to take the children and live with Bill's mother in Manchester temporarily.
Mr. Lang, describe what you remember about the defendant's demeanor when he was discussing his financial straits, his wife divorcing him, his wife kicking him out of his home, and being relocated to Maine. What was his demeanor when he was talking to you about this?
He was distraught.
Do you remember telling investigators he was in a dark spot?
I do.
What do you mean by that?
He was very depressed and felt like there was nothing positive in his life at the time.
He was angry.
He was angry, yes, sir.
What was the defendant saying about his wife's role in the problems that he was discussing with you, that you recall?
He blamed her for most of it,
For most of it?
if not all of it, yes.
Well, according to what you told the investigators, the defendant thought that she had taken everything from him, right?
Yes, I did say that.
According to what you told investigators, the defendant told you a couple of times that he believed she had taken everything from him, right?
Yes,
And he seemed angry, right?
yes.
Mr. Lang, in addition to what the defendant told you that Wednesday before his wife died, financial issues, divorce, belief that his wife was kicking him out of the house, taking everything from him, did he also directly threaten to take his own life?
He did, yes, sir.
What did he say to you in substance with respect to that?
He said that he had a gun at his house and he could go over at any time and shoot himself in the head.
Had the defendant ever spoken to you like that before in the roughly 10 years or so that you knew him?
No,
Was the defendant's demeanor still angry when he talked about taking his own life?
yes.
And did he explain to you why he would take his own life?
He said that he wanted to show Maureen the same pain that she was giving him.
He wanted to inflict pain on his wife, right?
Yes.
And that's what he told you, the defendant. And this again was the Wednesday before his wife died. One moment. No further questions, Mr. Lynn.
Any cross?
Yes, two questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Lang.
Good afternoon.
So the Argies over the 10 years,
Yes,
your kids would play with each other?
yes.
Bill would come over and share a beer with you?
Often, yes.
And in that time, is it fair to say that you knew Bill better than Maureen?
Yes, it was.
And that's because Maureen was quieter?
She was quiet, yes.
And when she joined you guys, she was quieter than Bill?
Yeah.
And when you said that Bill was distraught on Wednesday, April 3rd, while he was talking to you, what were you saying to him?
I believe the witness referred to Wednesday, March 27th.
Thank you. Were you responding to his statements? You don't have to say what, but,
Yes,
and was he listening to you?
I didn't have a whole lot to say. I was letting him talk. I felt that's what he needed.
Okay. And, thanks.
Any redirect? Okay, and may this witness be excused by both sides?
Yes.
Attorney Nye, you're all set?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. You can step down, you can stay or leave as you choose. Thank you.
So Judge, as we discussed, that's the end of the witnesses we can present today. Our remaining witnesses are being flown in tomorrow.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. We will resume tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The state, I believe, has two final witnesses to call in their case. So we might, the case might finish up sooner than we had earlier anticipated. Please continue to keep an open mind and keep all of my instructions in mind. Moving forward, if anything comes up, please let me know. Thank you.
All right.
I know during a quick chat with counsel up at the bench, I shared with them that I, have a seat, everybody. I shared with them that I had received information through the deputy clerk that media was interested in sharing the pictures of the crime scene via their disbursement of information about this case. I indicated I wanted to get input from counsel. If you're prepared to say something today, that'd be appreciated. If you want to wait and chat with me tomorrow morning, that's fine as well.
So I may have misunderstood, Judge. Were they seeking copies of the photos in order to possibly publish unredacted, or was there any discussion with respect to that? I thought on the bench you said something about Maureen Argie's image being blurred, but maybe I was mistaken on that.
Sure. As I explained, because this is, for whatever reason, a triangulated conversation, I did not get the information directly from the media source. I don't know. I wondered about that. There was a suggestion, I think, but I certainly could obtain more specific information as to what their intent is.
So I think that factor, frankly, we rely on that factor substantially before we have substantive input to give.
Okay.
I have nothing else to add.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll see if I can get more specifics through the AOC contact, and we can chat prior to the start of testimony tomorrow. Okay? Thank you. Anything else you need to chat with me about?
No.
Okay. And counsel, I know I had, in terms of the jury instructions, tomorrow morning, if you could let me know. That's an easy insert, but I do need to know whether or not you want me to provide the standard instruction about defendant statements.
Will do.
Thank you so much. Have a nice night.